Hi there everyone, I'm John and welcome to this week's Coolsmartphone Podcast. And joining me this week we have Khellan. Hi Khellan.
Hello.
And we have Matteo. How you doing, Matteo?
Hi John. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me back on the show. Hopefully I'll be more of a fixture from now on.
Yes, and welcome to the team.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a short but sweet but varied topic list this week. It's felt a bit like a quiet news week, but we've picked some interesting topics to discuss in this roundtable chat tonight. Starting with perhaps the biggest news of the week is that Apple Pay is now live in the UK. So do either of you guys use an Apple device or have the opportunity to play with Apple Pay?
I can say that I do use an Apple device on a daily basis. I have an iPod Touch 5th generation. It doesn't have the facility to sync with an Apple Watch or Apple Pay, so I'm cut out from all the Apple Pay fun.
I've got a Mac, and there's no way I'm whipping that out to try and pay for my coffee, so I'm a bit excluded as well. However, two of the people in the area that sit like 4 feet away from me are both, one of them has an iPhone 6 and one of them has an iPhone 6 Plus. Another one has an iPhone 4. And yet another one of my colleagues has now decided that Apple Pay is the reason he's going to get a new phone come the iPhone 6S/7/ whatever they're going to call it.
Has he explained that decision to you at all?
No, the justification was he leaves his house without his wallet more often than he leaves his house without his phone. So he's gotten to the train station before and not been able to get on trains. So his justification is, I'll be able to just use my phone.
So his justification for getting an iPhone is because he's a bit forgetful.
Hey, if a man has got £600 to spend on a phone, then go ahead, use that to pay for a ticket. I don't know. That's his choice.
What's interesting is it's gone live this week, and there are quite a few big names actually missing from the list of supporting banks. So I've got the list here of the banks which support Apple Pay at the moment, and we've got American Express, NatWest, Nationwide Building Society, NBNA, Royal Bank of Scotland, Santander and Ulster Bank. So missing from the list, from the traditional high street banks, there's no Lloyds Bank there, there's no HSBC, there's no TSB, no Halifax or First Direct. Now, we know that those banks, according to Apple, will work very soon with Apple Pay. So, we shouldn't have to wait too much longer. But Barclays, which is perhaps one of the biggest banks, high street banks in the country, and the Co-op, they say it's on their to-do list, but they're still in negotiations with Apple. Do you guys feel this has perhaps gone live a bit too early? Do you think there would have been better waiting until those big players join the party?
Okay then. Well, I think that Apple are just showing their muscle with Apple Pay. So bear in mind, Apple is a relatively young, agile tech company, whereas the banks and their payment systems at point of sale in retail are very, very slow to update and to continuously move forward. So the last big refresh the UK had was, I believe, about 5-6 years ago, or even more, when chip and PIN was introduced and made compulsory for all debit and credit cards in the UK. And that took ages, and there was loads of teething problems. So the last thing the banks want to do is go through another update phase and then find that 2, maybe 3 years down the line, Apple changed the fundamentals of the technology and all that infrastructure that supports it has to be updated. So my feeling is Apple has launched relatively early compared to what they were planning to do with the full set of partners to see if it would take off the media coverage and is essentially forcing those banks into joining Apple Pay just to be part of that first wave of contactless payments with smartphones and smartwatches. So it's an interesting one. I can understand why Apple have done it. It's interesting that there's been a lot of fanfare about it, but will the average UK consumer go for it? Because we're looking at a smaller subset than a universal, and it's only users with compatible iOS devices that can use Apple Pay.
So that's iPhone 6, the 6 Plus, and the Apple Watch. Is that right? So if you've got a 5S, you don't have the right NFC capability in there to actually use it. That's correct, isn't it?
My understanding of it is that, yes. So it's a very small subset of even Apple users compared to the overall smartphone user market. Whereas other banks and payment institutions are actually looking at something a bit more democratic and usable cross-platform, such as the QR payment system, which doesn't rely on high-tech, expensive equipment at point of sale to process transactions, but it actually generates a one-time, time-limited QR code on a device tied to an account, which gets scanned on the existing scanner at the till, and then deducts the account online from there. So it will be interesting to see where it goes. There are lots of different technological ways to approach it. Apple, as they have done in other market situations, are trying to create a new market and do that forcefully by, in a way, creating a new type of consumer in the mobile space, which is something they've done before. We just have to look at the iPod and the iPhone.
But they weren't first to market, though, were they? So I remember when the Nexus 7 first came out, it was possible using Google Wallet to go into Greggs and buy a sandwich using your Nexus 7.
Yes, and McDonald's. Obviously, in the UK, we had to do a bit of a run around with US Google accounts, but it was possible, and it still is to that respect. So if you have an Android device with Google Wallet, soon to be renamed Android Pay, you will be able to carry on doing that.
So are the two technologies in any way, shape or form compatible? Or is there some middleware in the way, or are organisations going to have to invest twice to the ability to take mobile payments?
It depends on the base technology used. So the fundamental NFC capability, which is a variant of RFID, should be identical. It's down to the software and the APIs, both at user end and at point of sale end, and then merchant banking systems that back that up to push that forward. My understanding is that the majority of NFC or contactless payment systems in the UK will be able to do so in passive mode, and the active transactions is a relatively high percentage of the point of sale units. So it depends on the shop, it depends on the retailer and the merchant bank who are providing them with the back-end systems.
So that kind of ties in with my feelings. There are two big, well, and this, again, it's just opinion, but there are two big things going on. One is that banks don't move fast when it comes to technology. There's no need. Their requirement is safe, not fast. So if whichever banks didn't hit the deadline that Apple imposed, they would just wait until the next phase of Apple's rollout. And I think what happened with the banks that should have been there but didn't make it is there were technical issues. It happens. They'd rather be safe than on time. I think that's what happened. The second part of it is, my suspicion is that although we like Apple Pay and Android Wallet and all these things, it's largely dependent on the same NFC or RFID. Now, any big retailer, I can't see the justification of them rolling out new PEDs, the new payment machines, until the old ones are out of stock or they're ready to do an upgrade, because why would they? They're working perfectly fine. So I'm expecting to see either a phased rollout where you just get a number of companies at a time, or the ones who are already on the PayWave system should be able to use that same back-end systems, the back-end technology. But America doesn't have PayWave. America doesn't have the contactless system. So this is all new to them. It's a real step change for them. And for us, we're literally going from card, which you can keep in your wallet, to phone, which you have to take out of your pocket. There's not a huge impetus for us to make those changes.
I agree. And the other thing is the complexity of the Apple system, whilst it tries to ensure larger security levels, is complex and expensive from a hardware point of view. Whereas something that is very, very popular in Asia, so QR code payments, which interact with the phone online, generating that one-time QR code, are much, much cheaper to implement and can quite happily run on the £30 to £50 smartphones. So there isn't that much pickup of it in Europe and the US yet, but I think that if the best example of that is the Greggs official app, which allows you to top up your account using PayPal and then use QR codes to pay for your sausage rolls and Greggs nuts at the till. So in interesting times, this is Apple's shot at it, and we'll see if the banks, retailers catch on. But I think that as time goes by, maybe something a bit simpler and just as effective, such as QR code payment systems, will catch on.
Yeah, that's cool. And of course, at time of recording, a lot of our listeners won't know, but Apple have actually launched new hardware today in a refreshed iPod Touch. And I'm just looking to see whether or not that actually has Apple Pay compatibility. And Matt, you wrote our write-up on the new iPod Touch. Was that something you was able to look at?
Yes, I tried looking into the press release. There's no mention of Apple Pay. At launch, the devices launch with iOS 8. The main thing which they're tying in the press release, they're tying the iPod Touch to is Apple Music, which is another recent service Apple launched. Personally, I'm quite surprised by the fact that they didn't launch Apple Music in tandem with the new iPod Touch, or even just announce them. Apple Music and the iPod Touch, in my view, are the closest service and product that Apple have in their portfolio. So it's interesting to see they've launched the iPod Touch. I've been waiting for this for over a year now, and I will be going out at the weekend to see if John Lewis have any in stock and purchase one. I love my iPod Touch 5th generation, but it is very slow and clunky, and at the moment it only gets used for Google Play Music and for Audible audiobooks. It's almost useless as a smart device because it's slow and clunky.
So I've got a question. What do you normally, whatever mobile phone you normally have, do you not use that as a music device?
I do when possible. Now, I'm maybe in a minority of people who subscribes to the Google Play Music All Access service. And that gives you a limitation of deactivation and active devices you can use with that, both for streaming and downloading music. So with Google Play Music, I have it on my iPod Touch. I synchronize the playlists I want to listen to, and I stream new music when I feel like it. But that way, I don't use up my devices in slots for Google Play Music, because at the moment I'm on a current refresh rate of 2 to 3 phones a month, because I've been investigating a lot of Chinese devices, which are relatively inexpensive.
This is that really frustrating 10 device maximum limit that Google's put on, and you can only deactivate 4, is it, at a time?
Yes, that's it. So you can only deactivate 4 a year. You can have a maximum of 10 devices, and that includes PCs you're uploading music to the service from. So that's why I use an iPod Touch. I have that one device, and that means I don't use my phone as a media player. When I do have a new smartphone, I usually put on Pocket Casts, the podcast client, which you can subscribe to the Coolsmartphone Podcast to on. And that's great for listening to podcasts.
Yes, that was awesome. I'm in awe.
Wow, do it again, just so I can hear it.
Self-promotion. We might be able to mention it later on. I mean, since we're speaking about music services, I've also been invited to try the new Spotify client for Android, which brings in also, as well as music, the facility to subscribe to podcasts. So as well as all the famous ones, you can just add the URL to Coolsmartphone's podcast and listen to the Coolsmartphone podcasts and our own lovely voices through the Spotify client.
I've heard on the grapevine that podcast is rather good.
Even if we
Marvin
do
Gaye,
say
eat
so
your
ourselves.
heart out.
Sorry, so which podcast was that again?
That was the Coolsmartphone one from the lovely people at Coolsmartphone.com.
Awesome, guys.
Ding.
I think when Lee gets back from holiday or listens to this podcast, we're due a bonus. Don't you think so, guys?
Absolutely.
Either that or it's going to be a straight, you're fired.
Okay, so just looking at the iPod Touch, the price for the base model, that's the 16 gig model, is 160 quid. Okay, so what do you get for your cash? You basically get...
The 6th generation one will give you the same 64-bit system on a chip that you get in an iPhone 6.
Right.
The old one was an iPhone 4S with an iPhone 5 screen and a really slim metal unibody. The new one has a much more up-to-date chip, so it's using last year's iPhone chip. It's using the same screen, and they've improved the cameras. One more glaring thing they've omitted is the little wristband clip that was in at the bottom left. They've taken that out of the device design.
So for 160 quid, you're getting the best part of a iPhone 6.
Yes. Essentially, yes, with a smaller screen. My hope originally was that they did an iPhone 6 screen without the cell radio, but with the same form factor, with an amazing battery. That's my personal dream. If Apple do that, I will personally go and buy yet another Apple device.
So 2 questions. How many Apple devices do you have at the moment? And why would you want to add it? Why wouldn't you just get the equivalent C version of whatever phone comes out? Reason being that Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, they're all streaming services. With unless you fill up your device with music, which means you wouldn't need those streaming services, which people are changing over their music habits or have done a long time ago. It's all about connectivity on the move, and not everything and everywhere has Wi-Fi. So why wouldn't you get a 6C, 5CS, 5SC, 7, whatever version number they're going to call it?
That's a very good question, and one open for debate, I'm sure, in the comment section to the article I wrote earlier today. My view is that an iPod fulfills that one function really well and does a few extras. So when traveling, if I'm using an iPod for music, podcasts, and occasional light gaming, I'm not killing the battery on my main mobile phone, which is with me. Therefore, you're splitting that functionality out. Your phone has a much better battery life over the course of maybe 24 hours of travel. And your iPod is performing that function very well. It's also a good way for me to keep touch with the iOS platform. I don't have any iPads or iPhones. I do have them for work in our lab at work, and I use them on a daily basis, but they're not personal devices. So to me, the iPod is an inexpensive way to have access to iOS. It fulfills certain requirements I have and improves the overall experience on the devices that aren't being used for music as well.
So if I've got this right, what you're saying is even though you've got access to iOS devices every day, all day, you're missing out unless you get an iPod Touch.
Yes, I agree. The other thing is...
Totally understand.
It's also something that I like doing for work. is when I'm sitting on a bus or I'm somewhere else, I will tether my iPod to my smartphone and try using Skyscanner's apps and website whilst in similar networking conditions to a phone, but on a low-end iOS device. As we said earlier, the chipset of the iPod Touch 5th generation is the one of an iPhone 4S with a bigger screen to serve. So it's an ideal low-end test device. We want to have the best user experience and products available to all users. So testing on that's great. And also for personal use, I can play threes, listen to music, and listen to the Cool Smartphone podcast.
Sorry, which podcast was that?
That was from the good people at Coolsmartphone.com. I don't know if we've mentioned it yet, but I hear it's a really good podcast.
Wait, I know them. I'm sure I've heard them before.
You mean those lovely people who tend to rickroll their readers with articles about Sony?
I'm never going to give up that idea about Sony.
Well, rickrolling is a dark, dark art. To our listeners, if you haven't read the article about Sony's CEO and their turnaround, it's worth a read and a click on the links.
So actually, for the price, that would seem to be a pretty reasonable piece of kit. Again, I'm just a little bit surprised that there's not been a massive publicity campaign behind it. I agree that actually perhaps the perfect time to have launched it would have been 2 weeks ago, same time as Apple Music, really. Seems a bit odd. But Apple are obviously doing something, right? Unlike Samsung, I don't know if you guys have seen, but they've actually missed their profit targets. Despite the fact of having some very nice, cool technology out there, they either overestimated how many they're going to sell, or they've had disappointing sales. I was wondering whether you guys had a chance to consider if Samsung are doing anything wrong, or what they need to change, or is this perhaps an indication that the smartphone market is in decline?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think we should differentiate between Samsung and the smartphone market as a whole, because although we in the West and in certain markets see Samsung as the smartphone brand after Apple, in Asia and Africa, where Samsung is still strong, there's an amazingly much more diverse market with many more devices, many more original equipment manufacturers and original device manufacturers. So they're facing very, very stiff competition, not only as a supplier of components, but as a supplier of actual devices. And they're facing competition mainly from MediaTek and the whole almost cottage industry that we're seeing in China of startups starting to produce phones using reference devices and components from MediaTek and doing their own marketing and sales strategies. So if you look at a company like OnePlus although it was backed by a slightly larger company called Oppo, they came to market with a very good set of components, were undercutting Samsung with their scrappy marketing tactics, and sold a very large number of devices. So Samsung are struggling because people aren't buying their components as much as they used to, and more importantly, it's become a much more cutthroat market. And also their software and the revenue they were expecting to get from the smartphone sales has been disappointing to them. So all the S services and the Samsung marketplace aren't generating as much as revenue as they would like to.
See, I don't know if they ever managed to get any sustainable revenue off of those services. There was a competing, but I'm not entirely sure that they weren't doing it to prepare from that potential split from Google rather than actual revenue generation for its own sake. I think they were preparing to, with their Tizen alternative, if it had to happen, or a complete hive off of Android.
Well, there's been lots of rumors circulating about that. It's a strange one. So Samsung being part of the Open Handset Alliance, guided by Google, Samsung never had full control over their ecosystem, so there's always something they were giving away to Google. Yet in some markets where Google don't operate, Samsung did very well with their own devices and app stores and services because there was no real competition on the device itself. So it's a strange one. It's interesting that you mentioned Tizen, because I believe that last week they passed the millionth device sold, considering they're only in a few markets such as India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. That's a very large number of handsets with such a relatively low-key launch. And there are more Samsung devices posed to hit the market soon. And as long as the core applications are available to the users of the platform, people will still buy their Samsung phones regardless of whether they're running Android or Tizen or whichever next semi-open source operating system comes along.
Cool. But Samsung have now had a fall in profits for 7 quarters in a row. Now, some of that has been down to the complex manufacturing process around the S6 Edge. But what do they have to do? What do they have to do to kind of suddenly turn that around? What's that killer feature? Why is it started to go a little bit pear-shaped for them? I mean, it wasn't that long ago since we were all slaughtering the plastic design of the S3, but they were selling loads of them. Now suddenly they've got these luxury items on the market and they're not selling very well, or they're selling relatively few. What do they have to do? What's changed for them?
I think part of this is saturation and variety. If you think that for a lot of people, Android handsets were Samsung handsets, and for a lot of people, once you've got a handset you like and you're going to upgrade, you get the second one, the next one in the list of the same manufacturer because you know how it works. However, I suspect there's only so many times you can buy the same type of handset which does the same type of thing. Apple has gotten away with it because of execution, but Apple controls the entire stack. You're gaining experiences and complete flows, where I'm not entirely sure Samsung was able to deliver that complete end-to-end ecosystem. And it's not just about S services, it's about the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing to remember is Samsung were almost first to market with regards to Android just after HTC, and they essentially gobbled up with HTC by muscling themselves in with both marketing and carpet bombing the market with a very wide product portfolio. And they did very well from the Samsung Galaxy Ace and Samsung Galaxy Mini end of the market all the way up to the S3, S4 and S5. The issue Samsung had was that they were in the first pack of device manufacturers coming out the door. They built up their processes and their manufacturing and marketing processes relatively quickly, so they had dominance for a couple of years. Then you got startups in Asia starting to do their own phones and coming out with their own stuff. Meanwhile, other manufacturers started to mature. So Motorola came through their Google acquisition, and the Moto G and Moto E obliterated the low end of the market for Samsung. So the Samsung Galaxy Ace 3 and Ace 4 were amazing flops. They just couldn't sell them because Motorola had a much cleaner, simpler user interface with very few preloaded apps, great value for money, great handsets, and it's not just in the UK, throughout Europe and South America and Asia. Motorola killed that end of the market for Samsung in terms of the middle to premium end of the low end. So it's the whole market and all the whole ecosystem.
Hold on, wait. So the top to the middle, low end, or the low end, the high part of the bottom. Please.
Yeah.
Confirm
Okay, so,
which
so
tier
I'm
that was.
sounding like a politician then. So So when we look at the low end, as in the 30 to 100, 120 pound price range, which equates as an equivalent up to 170, $180 in the smartphone market. You get the high end of the low end being the 80 to 120 pound bracket, and the low end of the low end being the 30 to 80 pound bracket. Does that make sense? Or the lower half of the low end?
Got it.
Okay,
I
we're
hate
going round
fractions,
in
but I
circles.
have it.
I think
Sorry,
there's an
please
editor.
continue.
There must be an editorial coming up on a website called Coolsmartphone.com about low
Ding.
ends of high ends, or high end of mid-range to low end.
High end of the mid-range to the high end of high end of the mid-range to high end of the low end.
It could be. Then again,
I'm
if
going
we're
to read that
talking
article.
yes, we'll do that. And if
Where would I
possible,
find
put
it?
in a Latin sentence with requirements of corrections to grammar.
Fantastic. Where would I read that article?
I hear it's going to be on coolsmartphone.com, and there will be
Good
plenty
Lord.
of and Google Plus posts about it.
Those guys do a great podcast as well. Do we also think that there's a little bit to do with the law of diminishing returns going on? In that, I mean, if you go out and buy a flagship phone, the way technology works, in 2 years' time, you notice the difference in change of technology less than you did do at your last upgrade. So people think there's less need to upgrade. So people who aren't on the contract, people who go and buy the phones outright, they might already have a S4, which is still doing the job perfectly well. Is the need for them to go out and buy a flagship phone now less than it was 3 years ago?
I would say yes and no at the same time. Theoretically, it should be yes, because if you're using the same apps and the same systems, you'd think it wouldn't really change. But if you think about it, a simple app like Facebook has grown. You've got Facebook videos, Facebook Messenger, Facebook everything else. The apps need new runtimes. There's new interfaces. I think what we think of as an app is not static. So
Yes, I
yeah,
agree.
theoretically, but no, in actuality, the same app you're using, whether you have the same ones or not, even when your phone gets itself updated, it's going to cause challenges. So yes, but no.
Okay. I mean, certainly that's more noticeable on iPhone devices, where all handsets tend to get the latest version of the software, whether they can really run it optimally as well. So my iPhone 4S that I use for work feels considerably slower than the S3 Mini I got to play with yesterday, for example, because software updates seem to be pushed out more widely on iOS devices than they do on individual manufacturers' devices. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that's fair to say. The other thing is we need to realise that in the last 2 years in particular, as Khellan was saying, the S4 was an amazing product. It carried on getting software updates, and it's still a very good phone. Not only that, but the operating systems themselves, both iOS and Android, have matured to a point where the updates are not big bang explosions, new user interface. They're iterations that incrementally improve the experience, but not to a level where it's big in your face and you notice it. So just look at what's coming with Android M and iOS 9. There's nothing that big to shout out as a big new feature that's a big new value-add proposition to a consumer. What it does bring is a lot of refinement, a lot of improvements in battery life. But to most consumers, that might not be a good enough reason to get a new phone and contract and tie themselves in for multiple years. What do you think, John, as an iOS user?
I have a terrible feeling that my iPhone 5S, which is currently nice, quick, snappy, the next version of iOS will suddenly become quite laggy. Almost as if Apple are encouraging me to go out and purchase a new phone. But I could just be cynical.
I have a rival opinion to that. Considering most people are on a 2-year refresh cycle,
Yep.
could it be that phones, being mini computers, are acting like, well, mini computers? If you refresh the phone, if you flash the phone and reset it and set it up all over again, is there any chance that the setup would actually make it that much a little bit snappier? I'm not saying you'd get full, the same feeling of a brand new out of the box phone, which is got the latest Samsung Snapdragon 811A revision 2 processor, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of it is craft and the way flash memory works. If you completely wipe it and reinstall, wouldn't that help?
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we all fill our phones with crap as well.
There are also some very good things we fill our phones with, such as the Coolsmartphone Podcast.
Oh my God.
I think I just broke Khellan.
Yeah. Of course, other things that we kind of generally put on our phones are kind of games, most of which are capable of holding our attention for about 5 or 6 minutes before we get thoroughly fed up with them. And this week has seen the sad death of Satoru Iwata from Nintendo. And Nintendo had recently made a move into mobile gaming on smartphones, or at least announced that as an intention. But it's still a great deal of frustration to me that mobile gaming still isn't as captivating as proper console big screen gaming. It's almost as if we get light versions of the game, and Nintendo are planning to release cut down versions of casual games using their intellectual property characters. I'm just wondering, do you think we'll ever see a game where hardcore mobile gaming is going to become mainstream, or do you think mobile handsets will always be the arena of Candy Crush? My heart sank when I said those words.
So there are two challenges, in my opinion. One is time and the other one is size. No funny comments. Hardcore gamers traditionally, they spend a lot of time, maybe hours, in front of their screens, their big screens, and they can be totally immersive doing their co-op games, doing their head-to-head, and until you can have the same level of immersive, until you can have that challenge playing with somebody or against somebody, I don't think mobile devices are gonna have that. The other one is size. You're looking at a 5, 6, 4.7 inch screen. You're not really going to get the same level of immersiveness and interactivity that will want to have you keep playing a game time after time after time. They're great for when you're waiting for a bus or on a commute or on your way from one thing to another, but that's the nature of the mobile games. They are not meant for taking up hours and hours of your time. I don't know. What do you think, Matteo?
I completely agree. It's a very different context. Gaming on mobile, whichever the platform, is a different type of gaming compared to a console game, both for battery constraints and UX constraints. I think that they're two different things and expect it to stay that way for a while. What I will expect is, on the other hand, is a lot of themes going on. So games, consoles, titles will have an equivalent mobile game, maybe some sort of integration between the two, similar to what Destiny did with their app, so you could handle your upgrades and so on from your phone whilst playing the real console game, or have maps on your phone to context and things happening on the console. So rather than be an either or, I can more expect mobile gaming to be a complement to console gaming.
I would be curious as to see what Microsoft would do in this arena. With their unified Windows 10 programming, where theoretically one program can be run everywhere, if there's different versions of the same game that you buy, and you can actually play a version or a variant of that from your Xbox to your handset, now that would be really curious. And the other part is, I can't remember what they call it. It's either continuity or handoff, where you can plug in bits and pieces onto your mobile all of a sudden you have a full computer experience. What happens to the mobile game then?
It's a similar thing to what Ubuntu have been preaching for a while regarding your mobile device itself being the one device you have, and it adapts to the context you're in. So it scales up or down.
Are you calling Ubuntu the Hobbit device?
Hobbit device? No, I said
The one ring.
Ubuntu
the one device to rule.
the one device to rule them all. I would love to have had the Ubuntu Edge when it was in its crowdsourcing phase, so the ultimate super smartphone. But I won't say that because it's still not finished. The software is not finished, and my understanding is Canonical's finding issues finding hardware partners. But we'll see what happens in the near future, because I can expect an explosion of Ubuntu Mobile in markets that aren't as friendly to Google and the big US multinationals, so particularly China and Russia.
But for me, I'd like to see some of the big league game manufacturers and hardware manufacturers really making a play now towards mobile. We're at a position where perhaps we can start to do streaming of games. Certainly Sony with their PlayStation Now software are certainly looking at streaming PlayStation 3 games or streaming off your PlayStation 4 to handset. So if there's some way of utilising 4G for cloud-based gaming, you play your game of FIFA on the bus. You get off the bus, you pause the game, you get home, you unpause the game on your other device, and it's exactly the point where you left off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, and I would play that game if it were available.
I'd love to see some of the Nintendo IP really start making inroads into that. If the games aren't as big and as complicated to render and in size, then surely they'd be better at being able to stream than your bigger high-res Xbox and PS4 games. That'd be really, really interesting to see what they could do in the mobile space.
Yeah. Of course, Nintendo went through a stage of losing money hand over fist, and everyone was just screaming, put your classic console games on the app stores. Super Mario Brothers for £1. You would sell a shed load. Yet they chose not to. They chose to protect the experience of console gaming.
Times have changed. Handsets have changed. Processors have changed. I think what wasn't really a possibility 2-3 years ago, it looks different now. It's easy to look back in the past and see the phone you have in your hand thinking, we could have done that. When Galaxy S, the original Galaxy S, oh my word, did I not like that phone. It couldn't have handled half of the things we do now. I still
have nightmares about the HTC Wildfire S.
Ooh.
Yeah. They gave you enough storage space to install Facebook, and that was it.
HTC was one of the few device makers, and I don't know any of this off the top of my head, who had this weird 768 RAM decision, and all their flagships, they optimized their code so well that nobody noticed, except when apps and bits and pieces started getting bigger and taking up more memory.
I remember those days. They were painful, and there were so many attempts at workarounds in the Modico forums and XDA to get things to work.
Yeah, just buy an iPhone, it's fine. But on that note, gents, I'd like to thank you very much for joining the Cool Smartphone Podcast. And
sorry, what podcast was that?
That'd be the Cool Smartphone Podcast.
I've heard of that. They're from the website coolsmartphone.com, right?
That's right. That's the guys. Always helpful. Always good. Always a great podcast. Really good read. Recommend everyone checks it out. So I'd like to say thank you, Khellan. And Khellan, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do it?
Khellan at coolsmartphone.com or WeBanger5 on the Twitters.
Very good. And Matt, if people want to get in touch with you?
I'm available on Google Plus as Plus Matteo John, and I'm also available on Twitter as @Todoleo. and you could read some of my output on Coolsmartphone.com.
Ding!
Excellent. Thank you very much, gents. It's been a pleasure.
And that's all we have time for on this week's Cool Smartphone Podcast. Don't forget, you can check out our website at www.coolsmartphone.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at Coolsmartphone. My name's John, and you can follow me on Twitter as well at GrainGeekJohn. Until next time, I wish you all a very happy week. Bye-bye.